Australia's unemployment rate at near record lows as jobs surge. Corporate insolvencies jump post-COVID, and Netflix's crackdown on password theft is working. Welcome to Fear and Greed Business News, Australia's best business podcast. It's Friday, the 21st of July, 2023. I'm Michael Thompson, and good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Good morning, Michael.
Sean, after the show, you were speaking today to Ed John, Executive Manager Stewardship at ACSI, which is the Australian Council of Superannuation Investors. Sounds impressive, a Council of Superannuation Investors. This is a very influential group.
It is. It's all the big super funds are part of this. In fact, if you combine the assets of the ACSI members, on average, you've got about 10% of every publicly listed company. So it is a huge group. Very, very influential. Basically, we talk about CEO pay and the fact that realised pay has come off somewhat after a pretty big year last year, whether that's a good or a bad thing, and what Ed John thinks is going to happen in the future. So all about CEO pay, fascinating topic.
Yeah, it's a really good conversation and well worth a listen this morning. The main story, though, before we get to that, Sean, anyway you look at it at the moment, the labour market is hot, with unemployment last month coming in at 3.5%, thanks to a surprising jump in jobs.
The economy is supposed to be slowing, Michael. I mean, that's what the retails are telling us. That's what loan arrears at the big banks are saying. That's what the Reserve Bank and the government is talking about. But someone forgot to tell the jobs market. Now, to be fair, the labour market figures from the Bureau of Statistics are a lagging indicator. So while the impact of the higher cost of living and interest rates is hitting most sectors, it hasn't yet knocked on the door of the labour market. But still, you'd expect some sort of impact by now, especially given leading indicators, things like job vacancy ads and hiring intentions, have come off. To the numbers, employment rose by about 32,600 people in June, and the workforce is now over 1 million people larger than pre-COVID. Full-time employment has increased by 380,000 over the past year, while part-time employment is up about 30,000. The states of New South Wales and Tasmania, with unemployment rates of 2.9% and 3.5% respectively, now have all-time low unemployment rates. The participation rate edged up, though it still remains near record lows. There were more hours work. It just is quite a red-hot labour market, Michael.
Quite red hot. I like that. Sean, you know how every now and then I like to prove to you just how much I listen to you.
Yes.
Well, on Wednesday, I believe it was, when we were talking about the minutes from the last meeting of the Board of the Reserve Bank, you said that before they make a decision next time on rates, that there'll be two key sets of data that they'll be looking at.
You were.
One of those is inflation data out next week. And the other one, the other big one is, of course, the unemployment figures from yesterday. What does it all mean for interest rates? Have I proven to you, first of all, that I listen and that I take notes?
Well, you listen and you understand. Even more impressive.
I'm impressed too. Please go on.
It certainly puts pressure on the Reserve Bank to lift interest rates one more time, but it isn't a done deal. As you just mentioned, the quarterly inflation figures for the June quarter, which is due out next week, that'll come into calculations. In fact, that's probably even more important, the inflation data, than the employment data. Now, in March, annualised inflation was 7%. The Reserve Bank would really want it closer to 6%, maybe not 6%, 6.3%, 6.4% for the June quarter. If it comes in at that, it'll be a very finely balanced decision. Now, bond markets have now ascribed a 40 to 45% chance that the Reserve Bank will lift rates when its board meets on Tuesday week. If the inflation data next week is a little bit stronger than expected alongside yesterday's labour force data, well, it's likely that rates will go up. But if it's not, they probably won't.
All right. Okay. I think I've probably reached my quota now of showing off. I've got nothing left in the tank for the rest of the show, Sean. Local markets, how do they perform yesterday?
The S&P ASX 200 closed up very slightly. In fact, it was up 1 point, I think, to 7,325 points. It started sharply higher on the back of Wall Street, then pretty much lost ground all day. Given the economic news and what that could mean for interest rates, it actually wasn't a bad day. The financials and tech companies were the best performers, while the healthcare index was the worst of the 11 sub-indices of the ASX 200. CSL was down again. Since the beginning of last month, the one-time largest company on the bourse is now off 15%, quite a fall from grace. The banks were mixed yesterday. QBE Insurance jumped 2.4%. Fortescue Metals Group rose 1.4%. Some of the gold miners performed poorly. Northern Star led those ones down. In corporate news, Telstra said it will cut nearly 500 jobs so it can automate some operations and compete harder with software rivals for business customers. Its share price closed down slightly. Newi's share price jumped 37% after the company, which develops investigative software for large businesses, said it expects earnings to be higher than they were last year thanks to a couple of major contracts it signed. And buy now, pay later group Zipco recorded a big jump in revenue and transactions, sending its share price up it finished up 2%, but earlier in the day it was up quite a bit more. Mind you, at 45 cents a share, it is still a long way below the February 2021 peak of more than $12.
Yes, it is. There's a bit of corporate news around. Okay, what's happening in international markets?
Well, it's earnings season on Wall Street, so there's plenty going on there. We've had some big companies releasing results recently, including Tesla and Netflix. I'll talk about them a bit later. So far, the market has held up pretty well. There were fears that earnings would disappoint. That would send the S&P 500 and tech-heavy NASDAQ lower, but so far, so good. Not a lot going on in commodity markets, Michael, and the Aussie dollar. Well, it was helped a little bit by the labour market news. It is buying 68.2 US cents or thereabouts.
Okay, we'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese was among a host of politicians from both sides of the political fence to attend former Cabinet Minister Simon Crean's funeral yesterday.
The 74-year-old died suddenly last month while in Germany, and a state funeral was held in Melbourne yesterday. Albanese called Crean a great Australian and beloved son of the Labor Party. He said, above all, he had a sense of fairness as his guiding star. Meanwhile, the secretary who developed and rolled out the robo-debt program has been suspended without pay. Catherine Campbell was suspended on July 10 following the release of adverse findings against her by the Robo-Debt Royal Commission. Campbell had been serving as a Deputy Secretary in the AUKUS Task Force Group at the Defence Department after losing her Secretary job at the Foreign Affairs and Trade Department.
Sean, Flight Centre's share price jumped 4% yesterday after it upped its profit guidance thanks to a surge in corporate travel earnings.
Flight Centre increased its earnings forecast by about 6%, Michael, joining Alliance Air Services and Ardent Leisure in upgrading outlooks. They have been the exception, though, because most companies around the place have been downgrading. Anyway, Flight Centre said high airfares and a big expansion in corporate travel clients meant total transaction volumes jumped nearly 25% last financial year compared to the pre-COVID 2019 financial year. Flight Centre Managing Director Graham Turner, he was pretty upbeat yesterday. He said he expects the larger volumes of new business to continue.
So clearly the predictions that everyone would just kind of stick with Zoom meetings from now on instead of corporate travel are a little bit off.
Well, in the case of Flight Centre, I don't know that we can say that as a blanket comment, but certainly in the case of Flight Centre.
They're my favourite kind of comments, Sean. Blanket comments that apply to all.
Right.
Anyway, we will push on then, Sean. Helen Rosamond, who defrauded National Australia Bank of millions of dollars, will spend a minimum of 8 years in jail for what the judge said was a scheme that was, quote, breathtaking in its audacity.
Judge Robert Sutherland sentenced Rosamond to 14 years with a minimum non-parole of 8 years. Last November, a jury found her guilty of 90 of 92 fraud charges laid against her. The fraud involved sending falsified and inflated invoices from her event management company Human Group to her friend Rosemary Rogers, who happened to be the Chief of Staff to the National Australia Bank Chief Executives Cameron Klein and then Andrew Thorburn. Rogers, who was authorised to approve payments of up to $20 million, would then approve the invoices without questioning them. Rogers pleaded guilty to charges of being an agent corruptly receiving a benefit. She was sentenced to 8 years jail earlier in the year. Rosamond is going to jail for 15 years.
I mentioned this one at the top of the show, Sean. The number of corporate insolvencies jumped by 62% in the year to June, with the potential for many more as the economy slows.
Australian Securities and Investments Commission figures show that nearly 8,000 Australian companies went into administration, liquidation or receivership last financial year, up from 4,900 the previous year. It's the highest number of business failures since 2018-19. Now, during COVID, insolvency numbers fell thanks to temporary measures put in place by the Morrison government to protect vulnerable businesses from the economic shock of the pandemic. The construction sector is definitely among the hardest hit, with insolvencies up 72%. New South Wales and Victoria accounted for the bulk of those. And in fact, those two states recorded the biggest rise in overall insolvencies. We talked a lot about the likelihood of insolvencies surging. It didn't happen during COVID. Definitely is happening now.
How about this story, Sean? Pacific Islander fruit pickers and farm workers across 2 states will be found new jobs after a federal government decision to revoke a business licence in response to what unions say amounts to modern slavery.
Yeah, so Australian labour hire company Links Employment has been under investigation following claims workers were mistreated. The company claims to have a large database of local and international workers sourcing long-term employment solutions from the Pacific Islands. But workers at the Tasmanian labour hire company claim management seized their visas, refused to provide pay slips, and staff were bullied and threatened. Australian Workers' Union National Secretary Paul Farrow said the business model amounted to modern slavery. Now the government has stepped in and revoked the company's business licence.
Sydney Airport has called for Qantas and Virgin Australia to make room for other airlines at the gateway by giving up slots.
Airport boss Jeff Colbert issued the call on the back of new passenger data showing numbers on key domestic routes such as Sydney-Melbourne are still well down on 2019 levels. Colbert said if incumbent airlines are flying less on those routes, they should give up their slots to other domestic carriers or international airlines seeking to operate out of Australia's biggest gateway. Slots are allocated to airlines at capacity-constrained airports like Sydney, allowing them a specific period for takeoffs and landings. Under current rules, airlines must use their slots in Sydney at least 80% of the time in order to keep them. Now, June passenger traffic released by Sydney Airport yesterday show a very slight increase, a 1.2 increase in domestic travellers compared to June 2022, but a 67% jump in international passenger numbers.
Well, that is significant.
Sure is.
Tech billionaire Scott Farquhar says demand for workers to return to the office cubicle is short-sighted and that half of new staff at Atlassian now work remotely based in regional areas around the world.
The co-founder of the software giant said attracting and keeping talent in the sector was becoming increasingly important if Australia was to maintain its position as the lucky country in very difficult times. Now, speaking at the Technology Council of Australia's National Tech Summit in Brisbane, Farquhar said flexible conditions were a boon for decentralised states, such as Queensland, that did not have to attract entire companies to benefit from growth in the tech sector. Farquhar said 53% of new employees recruited by Atlassian over the past 2 years live more than 2 hours from a company office. The company employs more than 10,000 people around the world. A quarter of its Australian workforce live outside Sydney.
Isn't it funny just how divided basically the business community is over this, where you've got Atlassian at one end of the scale and then you've got the big banks right at the other end saying that they want people in the office pretty much as possible. There really does not seem to be a consensus.
No, and even within the tech industry, for example, remember Farquhar actually took on Elon Musk over this because Elon Musk wanted everyone back in the office and Scott Farquhar tweeted how silly that was and Elon Musk bit back. And yeah, there really isn't a uniform approach.
Turning to international news now, Sean, and a very serious story, this one. 3 people are dead, including the gunman, and at least 6 are injured after an Auckland CBD shooting described by New Zealand Prime Minister Chris Hipkins as a, quote, very grim morning.
A police officer who is critically injured but has since stabilised is among the injured from the attack at a building and construction site. Gunfire was heard in the centre of Auckland around 7:20 a.m. Dozens of police vehicles, a helicopter and several ambulances scrambled to attend once the threat became clear. Local media reported the gunman was a 24-year-old man who worked at the building and had arrived there with a pump-action shotgun. He was later identified. He was serving a community-based sentence of home detention for family violence offences when this happened.
Sean, you mentioned this one at the top of the show as well. Netflix's crackdown on passwords seems to be working, with the streaming service recording one of its biggest jumps in subscriber numbers since the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah, so Netflix added nearly 6 million subscribers in the 3 months to the end of June. It now has 238 million worldwide subscribers. Phenomenal numbers. But management warned that competition is tough, and not helping is the strike by both writers and actors unions in the US. Investors weren't impressed at the end of the day and sold the stock down. Now, Netflix reckons new subscribers this quarter will be about the same level. Last year, it introduced a low-priced option that includes commercials and then began to block the sharing of passwords, which it said enabled an estimated 100 million people to watch its TV series and films for free. That crackdown is now working, hence they're getting bigger subscriber numbers.
Do you reckon password theft is a bit harsh?
Depends whether you do it or not, really, doesn't it?
No, look, I mean, just objectively, I would say that like family entertainment collaboration or something like that is actually a nicer way to put it.
But yeah, I can't bring myself to sharing my password unless I buy the family box, because I know Netflix is a massive company, but I don't mind that. I don't mind paying extra for that. On my own there, Michael.
No. It's fine. It's fine. It just feels like you're kind of putting me in a corner here, Sean. Let's move on. Tesla. We mentioned Elon Musk. He gets a few mentions today, doesn't he?
He does. Yeah, as always.
Yeah, they're investing more than $1 billion on a supercomputer known as Project Dojo as the company pushes to create autonomous driving software.
So Elon Musk said the supercomputer is being designed to handle massive amounts of data, including video from Tesla cars. He said the auto company has a staggering amount of video at its disposal thanks to customers' use of camera-based driver assistance software called Autopilot. The announcement came as Tesla said profitability shrank during the June quarter. Musk then also said the company will probably keep cutting prices of electric vehicles if interest rates continue to rise. Tesla's on track to build 1.8 million vehicles this year, Michael. Not bad.
That's quite impressive.
Very impressive.
Not that I suspect Elon Musk really cares what I think. Up next, Sean, Ed John, Executive Manager, Stewardship at ACSI, the Australian Council of Superannuation Investors.
All about CEO pay, a very controversial topic. Well worth a listen.
Yeah, absolutely. It's up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. And make sure as well that you listen tomorrow for the weekend edition, which is a very different program to our weekday shows. It's where you and I really go head to head to pick the biggest story of the week and sleeper stories. And there's a lot of argy-bargy, and we rope our Fear and Greed colleague Adam Lang in to be a fair and unbiased judge.
So I was talking to a gentleman yesterday who was a very senior consultant, and I was doing some other work, and he said, Sean, I like the weekend edition. And I kind of took a backward step because I always think the weekend edition can get a little silly. And he said, if I'm doing exercise, I just catch up on the week and I listen to you two carry on, and it's great fun. And I take that as a great compliment that someone as senior as this gentleman likes the weekend edition.
Yeah, I don't like the fact that he says that we carry on. For me, I'm treating it very seriously. It's a competition that I want to win.
There's no carry on as far as we're concerned.
No. I'm sorry if that's the way that he perceives it. Anyway, we hope to put on a good show for him tomorrow. So make sure you hit follow and subscribe to the podcast so that it just lands automatically in your playlist. Thank you very much, Sean.
Thank you, Michael.
It's Friday, the 21st of July, 2023. As I mentioned, make sure you're following the podcast and also join us online. You'll find us on LinkedIn and Instagram, Twitter and Facebook. I'm Michael Thompson, and that was Fear and Greed Business News. Have a great day.